It is to you, dear mother, to you who are doubly my mother, that I am about to confide the story of my soul. When you asked me to write it, I feared the task might unsettle me, but since then, our Lord has deigned to make me understand that by simple obedience I shall please Him best. I begin, therefore, to sing what must be my eternal song, the mercies of the Lord. St.Therese, otherwise known as the Little Flower, is one of the most popular saints out there. And yet, when learning about her life, it is surprising that it was straightforward and ordinary. Despite this, she is one of the 37 doctors of the Church. Her profound yet simple little way to heaven, as she called it, she discovered a spiritual path that was a shortcut for simple souls. She considered herself very little, too little to suffer great trials. Instead, she thought of herself as a little child who would always be held in God's arms. She had astounding faith and confidence in God, which at times sounded audacious. She often said she would not go to purgatory and that she would become a great saint. If anyone else had said this, they most likely would have been scolded for boasting and lacking in humility. However, for Therese, it was because she was so humble and aware of her need for God's mercy that she had such great confidence in His mercy. A few years before Therese's death, her superior instructed her to write the story of her life, which we will now tell. Born January 2nd, 1873, Therese was the youngest of 9 children. Of the 9 children, 5 survived, the others dying in infancy, and another, Helen, when she was 5 years old. The family was very holy. In fact, along with Therese, her parents, Zélie and Louis Martin, were canonized in 2015, and her sister, Léonie Martin, who often felt like the black sheep of the family due to her many struggles, is now declared servant of God. As the youngest, Therese was babied but not necessarily spoiled, although it could have gone that way. Even Therese admitted that had it not been for God's special protection over her soul, with all the pampering she received from her sisters and father, it would have been a wonder she never became spoiled. She never had to make her own bed or do her own hair. It wasn't until she went on a retreat for her Holy Communion preparation that she realized it wasn't normal for a girl her age not to know how to do her own hair. She had brought her hairbrush to one of the sisters overseeing the girls and held it out, innocently assuming she would brush her hair. The sister, of course, told her that a girl her age should be able to brush her own hair. As a little girl, she was very bright and intelligent. Her mother writes to her sister, "Baby is a little imp. She comes to kiss me, and at the same time she wishes me to die. Oh, how I wish you would die, dear Mama," she said. And when she was scolded, she was quite astonished and answered, "But I want you to go to heaven, and you say we must die to go there." And in her outburst of affections for her father, she wishes him to die too. "The dear little one will hardly leave me. She follows me everywhere, but likes going into the garden best. When I am not there, she refuses to stay and cries so much that they are obliged to bring her back. She will not even go upstairs alone without calling me at each step, 'Mama, Mama.' And if I forget to answer, 'Yes, darling,' she waits where she is and will not move." With her strong affection and will, she was also inclined to be stubborn and sometimes had tantrums. Her mother writes, "I have to correct poor baby who gets into frightful tantrums when she can't have her own way. She rolls on the floor in despair, believing all is lost. Sometimes she is so overcome she almost chokes. She's a nervous child, but she is very good, very intelligent, and remembers everything." Therese's happy world came to an abrupt halt when her mother died of breast cancer when Therese was only 4 years old. She remembered her father lifting her to her mother's still form for one last goodbye. She writes, "Without saying a word, I put my lips to her icy forehead. I do not remember having cried much, and I did not talk to anyone of all that filled my heart. I looked and listened in silence, and I saw many things that would have been hidden from me." From here on, Therese lost her outgoing and spunky nature. She leaned heavily on her little family circle for security. She said of herself, I became timid, shy, and extremely sensitive. A look was enough to make me burst into tears. Her sister Celine was her best friend and playmate, and while her father was very maternal, Therese dubbed her oldest sister, Pauline, as her second mother. Louis Martin sold his wife's lace business and moved his daughters to a country home in Lisieux, where they were closer to family. Her two older sisters, Pauline and Marie, taught Therese until she was 8 years old, and when she was 9, she was sent to a school run by Benedictine nuns. Perhaps with the loud and stimulating atmosphere of children running and playing, coupled with Therese's sensitive and timid nature, Therese struggled immensely in school. She wrote, "The 5 years I spent at school were the saddest of my life, and if my dear Celine had not been with me, I could not have stayed there for a single month without falling ill." Because she was so bright, and thanks to her sister's excellent teaching, Therese was in the advanced grades with the older children, but this also made her the youngest. Because of this, and because she was what the other kids considered the teacher's pet, she didn't fit in, and one girl in particular who struggled academically took a dislike to Therese and constantly bullied her. With her timid nature, Therese hid inside herself, never participating in games. Instead, she preferred to play with the younger children in the lower grades. Her sister Celine, who went to school with her, says, "She developed a fondness for hiding. She did not want to be observed, for she sincerely considered herself inferior." Her loneliness in school was chased away when she went home to her parents and older sisters, and her happiness was restored for a little while. She wrote in her autobiography, "Every evening I went home, and then my spirits rose. I would climb onto Papa's knees, telling him what marks I had, and his caresses made me forget all my troubles. With what delight I announced the result of my first essay, for I won the maximum number of marks. In reward, I received a silver coin which I put into my money box for the poor, and nearly every Thursday I was able to increase the fund." Another cross was in store for Therese. She was going to lose her second mother, her sister Pauline, to the convent. Initially, this was meant to be kept from Therese until the details were finalized to spare Therese's unnecessary anxiety. But Therese found out when she overheard Pauline talking to Marie about it. She writes of her anguish, "I did not know the Carmel she was talking about, but I knew that she was leaving me to enter a convent and that she would not wait for me." As hard as this was for Therese, it set things in motion to enter the convent as well. Pauline, trying to console Therese, told her about the religious life and what it all meant. Therese, always contemplating things, felt that God was calling her to the religious life as well. "I felt this so strongly that I had not the least doubt about it, nor was it a childish dream, but the certainty of a divine call. This impression, which I cannot properly describe, left me with a feeling of great inward peace." It would still be some time before Therese could enter the convent, since Therese was only 9 years old. The day Pauline was to enter the convent was bittersweet for Therese and her family. Little did their father know at the time that he would be giving all 5 of his daughters away to the cloister in due time. For now, he gave away Pauline, and it was an emotional day for the family. We were bathed in tears, and people gazed at us in astonishment when we entered the church. But that did not stop her crying. I even wondered how the sun could go on shining. "Perhaps, dear mother, you think I exaggerate my grief a little. I confess that this parting ought not to have upset me so much, but my soul was yet far from mature, and I had to pass through many trials before reaching the haven of peace, before tasting the delicious fruits of perfect love and of complete abandonment to God's will." The loss of Pauline was so difficult for Therese that she soon became ill. The illness started with severe headaches, which lasted for months into the next year. Later, the headaches turned into a strange illness that seemed to affect both her body and mind. She writes, "I do not know how to describe this extraordinary illness. I said things which I had never thought of. I acted as though I were forced to act in spite of myself. I seemed nearly always to be delirious. Yet I feel certain that I was never, not for a minute, deprived of my reason. And what fears the devil inspired! I was afraid of everything. My bed seemed to be surrounded by frightful precipices. Nails in the wall took the terrifying appearance of long fingers, making me cry out in terror. One day, while Papa stood looking at me in silence, the hat in his hand was suddenly transformed into some horrible shape, and I was so frightened that he went away sobbing. Many prayers and novenas were made for Therese's cure. Louis gave Marie some money to have some novenas and masses said at the Our Lady of Victory shrine in Paris. Then one Sunday during the novena, Therese began to call out for her sister Marie. Leonie was sitting with her, and as she was used to hearing Therese call out like this, she ignored her. Therese became more frantic with her calling for Marie, and Marie eventually heard her and knelt by Therese's bed. By this time, Therese was delirious and didn't recognize Marie, even though Marie kept calling Therese's name. Finally, in desperation, Marie turned to the statue of the Blessed Mother, calling on her help. Leonie and Celine also joined her in their pleas, and Therese too turned her eyes to the statue, begging her silently to have pity on her. Suddenly, everything stopped because Therese saw Our Lady smile at her. She writes, "Suddenly, the statue seemed to come to life and grow beautiful, with a divine beauty that I shall never find words to describe. The expression on Our Lady's face was ineffably sweet, tender, and compassionate, but what touched me to the very depths of my soul was her gracious smile. Then all my pain vanished. 2 big tears started to my eyes and fell silently. She thought, 'Our Blessed Lady has come to me. She has smiled at me.' The sudden change in her demeanor alerted her sisters that something supernatural had happened, and although Therese initially wanted to keep the miracle for herself, she gave in to their questions and told her sisters, who in turn, out of excitement, told Pauline and the other sisters at the Carmelite Convent. Soon, over the days that followed, the sisters made so much of the miracle and had many questions that Therese began to doubt herself and felt that she had inadvertently told the sisters a lie. This tormented her deeply, and she felt her joy over the supernatural event had been ruined. But later, Therese admitted that it had been right for this to happen, as God had allowed the confusion to keep Therese from becoming vain over the miracle. Over the next years, Therese made her first Holy Communion and Confirmation. During her catechism classes, she excelled so well that as though seeing into the future, the chaplain jokingly called her his little doctor of theology. When Therese was 10 years old, she began to suffer from scruples. The only relief she could get from this was when she talked to her sister Marie, who acted as a spiritual director. Marie advised Therese on her scruples and how to handle them, what she could confess and what she shouldn't. The scruples went on for 2 years, and so it was another cross for Therese when Marie, too, left to enter the Carmelite Convent. Therese writes, "As soon as I knew of her decision, I made up my mind to take no further pleasure in anything here below. I could not tell you how many tears I shed. And yet, this hardship led her to a greater maturity in her spiritual life. No longer having Marie there to pour her heart out to, Therese turned to her little brothers and sister who were in heaven, and to them she confided all her troubles. At this time, Therese's desire to practice virtue was growing, but she could not seem to overcome her extreme sensitivity. Since she never had to help with housework before, she tried to do more by helping out around the house or making her bed. But if no one noticed, she would begin to cry. This was true also if she had ever accidentally offended anyone. She would begin to cry, and then when she felt better, she would cry again for having cried." Before entering the convent, Therese needed to mature in this area, or as she put it, grow up in a hurry. On Christmas Eve, she received what she calls her Christmas Eve grace, when Jesus took away the extreme sensitivity she inhibited the day her mother died. My extreme sensitiveness made me almost unbearable. I simply could not correct myself of this miserable fault. How then could I hope to be admitted to the Carmel? A miracle on a small scale was needed to give me strength of character all at once, and God worked this long-desired miracle on Christmas Day, 1886. After Christmas Eve Mass, Therese arrived home with her family. Everyone was tired, but Therese looked forward to the tradition of finding small presents in her shoes. I knew that when we returned home after midnight mass, I should find my shoes in the chimney corner, filled with presents, just as when I was a little child, which proves that my sisters still treated me as a baby. But the time had come when our Lord wished to free me from my childhood failings, and even withdraw me from its innocent pleasures. On this occasion, instead of indulging me as he generally did, Papa seemed vexed, and on my way upstairs I heard him say, "Really, all this is too babyish for a big girl like Therese, and I hope it will be the last year it will happen." His words cut me to the quick. Celine, knowing how sensitive I was, whispered, "Don't go downstairs just yet. Wait a little. You would cry too much if you looked at your presents before Papa." But Therese was no longer the same. Jesus had changed her heart. Upon receiving this special grace, Therese was able to push back her tears and bravely show her joy instead. I ran downstairs to the dining room, and though my heart beat fast, I picked up my shoes and gaily pulled out all the things, looking as happy as a queen. Papa laughed and did not show any trace of displeasure, and Celine thought she must be dreaming. But happily, it was a reality. Little Therese had regained, once and for all, the strength of mind which she had lost at the age of 4.5. With this special grace, not only was Therese's cheerful and spunky nature restored, but Jesus also gave her a zeal for the conversion of sinners. One day, Therese learned about a criminal who would be put to death for killing 2 women and a child. A priest had tried to visit him many times, but the man, Henry Pranzini, chased him away. Therese immediately began to pray fervently for the conversion of this man, and soon Celine, learning of Therese's mission, joined her. Together, they offered many small sacrifices in all the merits of the Passion of Jesus. The day after his execution, Therese opened the paper. This is what she saw. Tears betrayed my emotion. I was obliged to run out of the room. Pranzini had mounted the scaffold without confessing or receiving absolution, and the executioners were already dragging him toward the fatal block, when all at once, apparently in answer to a sudden inspiration, he turned around, seized the crucifix which the priest was offering to him, and kissed our Lord's sacred wounds 3 times. I had obtained the sign I asked for, and to me it was especially sweet. Therese's zeal for sinners increased every day after that. She compared her zeal to an insatiable thirst. Along with this thirst came her growing desire to enter the convent, though she was only 15. 3 of her sisters were now in the convent, and Therese dreaded telling her father of her secret to enter so young. With many tears, Therese explained her feelings, and her father, though not saying much, showed his emotion on his face as he took his hands in hers. He told her she was still very young to make such a decision. But as Therese continued to speak of her vocation, he no longer wept. They walked together in the garden, talking for a long time, and then he stooped down and plucked a small flower from the garden and gave it to Therese, telling her that she was God's little flower. I fancied myself listening to my own story, so close was the resemblance between the little flower and little Therese. I received this flower as a relic, and noticed that in gathering it, my father had pulled it up by the roots without breaking them. It seemed destined to live on, but in another and more fertile soil. Papa had done just the same for me. He allowed me to leave the sweet valley, where I had passed the first years of my life, for the mountain of Carmel. I fastened my little white flower to a picture of Our Lady of Victories. The Blessed Virgin smiles on it, and the infant Jesus seems to hold it in his little hand. Now that she had her father's consent and blessing, Therese assumed she would only need to talk to the nuns and enter, but this was not to be. God allowed Therese to go through many trials first. Her uncle was especially opposed to the idea, saying the whole thing of her entering at the age of 15 was ludicrous, and that it would take a miracle to convince him. Therese wept and prayed. She writes, "Nature itself seemed to share my bitter sadness, for during these 3 days, there was not a ray of sunshine, and the rain fell in torrents. I have noticed again and again that in all the important events of my life, nature has reflected my feelings. When I wept, the skies wept with me. When I rejoiced, no cloud darkened the blue of the heavens. But when she saw her uncle again a few days later, he was a totally different man. He had prayed through the night and told her that a miracle was no longer needed. Go in peace, my dear child. You are a privileged little flower that our Lord wishes to gather. I will put no obstacle in the way. Joyfully, Therese went home, and the rain had stopped, and the sun shone. But now it was the convent superior who felt that Therese was too young, and she wouldn't be allowed to enter until she was 21. Therese and her father made an appointment to meet with the bishop, and Therese even put her hair up for the first time to appear older. But once again, they were sent away without much consolation, for the bishop said he would need to speak to the superior of the Carmelite convent first. Therese already knew how the superior felt about her entering so young, and she couldn't hold back her tears. While they waited for the bishop and the superior to have their meeting, Therese went with her family to Rome. It was a wonderful distraction as well as a source of strength. They saw many shrines and the Colosseum, but one of the most important discoveries for Therese was the realization that priests were in great need of prayer. She had always thought of them as pure and holy souls, not human, and it wasn't until she overheard their conversation about worldly things that she realized how much they needed prayers too. To pray for sinners delighted me. To pray for priests whose souls seemed pure as crystal, that indeed astonished me. But in Italy, I realized my vocation. During that month, I met with many holy priests, and yet I saw that even though the sublime dignity of priesthood raises them higher than the angels, they are still but weak and imperfect men. During her pilgrimage, Therese got a chance to meet the Pope. Though they were instructed to simply kiss his ring, receive his blessing, and then promptly leave, Therese had a daring plan to ask his permission to enter the cloister. With the encouragement of Celine, who knew of Therese's plan to speak to the Pope, Therese kissed his hand and said, "Holy Father, I have a great favor to ask you."